はい、皆さん、キングダムマインドのヒロです。いつも動画をご覧になっていただき、誠にありがとうございます。継続的にですね、ミスター・ゲイリー・ウェインのジェネシス6コンスピラシー、こんな分厚い本なんですけれども、約800ページです。この中には驚くべき秘密と世の中の裏の営みがまんべんなく書かれています。今日のタイトルはネフィリムに関してです。女のネフィリムはいたのか、またなぜ創造主神はヨシュアなどがカナンを征服する際に全滅皆殺しを宣言したのか。ここには大きな秘密があるんです。またエゼキエル戦争はいつ起こるのか、この辺に今回は迫ってまいります。皆さん覚悟しておいてください。これらが今後数年のうちに実際にこの世の中で起こってまいります。That there is no female Nephilim, but you are.
That's not really true.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. So I think what they're and again we all sort of disagree on a few things, but I like to say, okay, that's what they say, but why would that be the case?
Mm-hmm.
There's and they have part of the story, but the thing I would encourage people to, when they're trying to figure out chronology and events, is to understand that the flood is sort of the great demarcation, and there's a restart to civilization after the flood, and that the Nephilim that were before the flood, as they're called biblically, they could produce in great numbers, and there were many females at that time. And so we don't get a female that's listed before the flood, but we do get biblically some female giants that are listed after the flood. So the first one that we're shown is in Genesis 36. With the Dukes of Seir, and these are Horim giants. And Horim in Deuteronomy 2 says they're a giant, but not a Nephilim. It says they're Rapha, which is, and Rephaim is the plural term.
Right.
And so we get a tribe of Rephaim described in Genesis 14 in the War of Giants between Mesopotamian giants and covenant land giants. And then in Genesis 15, when Jehovah the Elohim is promising the land to Abraham, that's between the Nile and the Euphrates River, and you have the Rephaim tribe listed there as well as a specific tribe. And so the Horim are akin to the Rephaim, which are post-Diluvian giants, or after the flood versus before the flood.
Right.
So they do have some females, but they do have an issue in producing females, which gets to be one of their problems. So whether or not giants survive the flood or they're recreated or a combination of both, we're not told why biblically, just that they show up after the flood. And I make a good case for second incursion in book 2, but the fact is all around the world they show up both before and after the flood. So people can sort of wrestle with themselves as to how they think they get there. I present in my books ways. In book 2, I go more with second incursion or a second creation by the offspring gods who replace the parent gods. So in Western pantheons, you have, like in the Greek pantheon, Kronos and Gaia as the parent gods and part of the 12 Olympian gods before the flood, but they get overthrown by the offspring gods, and said to kill the immortals, but you can't kill an immortal, so that's an oxymoron. That's not possible. But I think what happens is those parent gods, they went to the pit prison for their crimes before the flood.
Like,
and
Judah
after
and
then after the flood, Zeus takes over.
And
creates like Hercules and Perseus and Theseus as giants, and it's doing the same crimes. And this is the same pattern around the world. So biblically, it's the Baalim gods. So Baal is the son of El, the parent god before the flood, that reigned from Mount Hermon, and Ashtaroth was the female goddess. They were the biggest proliferators of creating the giants amongst those, but all of them did it. And then Baal and Anat after the flood, and then they disappear because they went to the pit prison as well. Now, other gods move up to replace them in that rank and order. It's like an army of angels or an army of gods, which says there's rank and order, and they would just move up in position when they're gone. And so that's why the gods disappear from walking amongst us, even though not all of the gods or the fallen angels are in the pit prison, only the ones who did specific crimes. So if something changed with the giants, and I think it begins in Genesis 6:3, beginning with life being limited to 120 years versus having an immortal body and an immortal counterfeit spirit. That were passed on through the gods and the fallen angels. And it seems to be something to do with fertility also being passed on, and infertility for the Rephaim giants. And they're not going to be as large or as gifted, but giants nonetheless. So like Og, he would have been 12 to 15 feet tall. And he would have been somewhere 5 to 6 feet wide. Goliath was 11 feet 3 inches tall and described as stout and wide as well. And it was generally a 2-to-1 height to width ratio for the giants compared to the 3-to-1 of the average sort of human around the world. So they're strong, muscular, and wide. And so there's a term that's called in Ezekiel 32 in the King James Version called the terrible ones. And in this dual prophecy in Ezekiel 32, it has important prehistory information. It's valid for the time of the prophets. So when you have Pharaoh and some of the characters talking about is referring to the time of Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylon invasion and the prophecies to do with that, but it also has some end time prophecies that weren't fulfilled in the time of the prophet. So again, not a conflict. It's just you need to identify which ones happened in the time of the prophet and what's for the end time. Well, you have these terrible ones. That's the Hebrew word, the Eritim, ones being the plural. Erit would be the singular. So, and these are the branch of the terrible ones, as they're talked about, that are going to be killed in that bloodline in the end time when things are going to be resolved. And they're talking about the giants. And so these individuals that are already in the pit prison are locked in the sides of the abyss, the pit prison. And these are the terrible ones who are slain and did terrible things on the earth. And they're talking to another terrible one, Pharaoh, as to what's going to happen to him with another terrible one, Nebuchadnezzar. And so in that definition, you get all these words about describing what a terrible one is that's associated with giants, but it's the childless and fertility issue thing that is part of the meaning. And so and I think it wasn't not from the ability from ovum and sperm, it was more from they weren't able to produce enough women. So God had changed things to ensure they weren't going to absolutely take over the world with their size and great ability to reproduce like they could before the flood. So Genesis 36 is an addition to the table of nations where you have all of Noah's 8 sons and all the descendants are going to list 70 patriarchs for the 70 nations to be ruled over by the council of the gods. Okay. And because the gods still ruled the earth, just because we had the flood, this was just an intercession to make sure everybody's name in the book of life had that opportunity to leave it in or have it blotted out. So when we look then at the passage in Genesis 36, this is in addition to the table of nations, because it's talking about these Horim. They do not have a patriarch in the table of nations. They're part of the giants because none of the Rephaim or giant patriarchs are listed. Only the descendants of Noah or the names are listed. And Horim are one of these giants, understood as red-haired, pale-faced, and hazel-eyed giants. There are different colored hair of giants,
Right.
but this is their particular form. And this fellow named Seir is the Duke of Seir, who Mount Seir is named after. And Seir goes back to the Hebrew word satir, which has associated with a degraded watcher, a hairy watcher, or a goat god. Now he has several sons and daughters, and one of his daughters is Timnah.
Mm-hmm.
And Timnah marries Eliphaz, son of Esau,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
brother of Jacob.
Yes.
He lost all of the Abrahamic blessings,
right,
inheritance, and Messianic promise, even though he was the older son and was tricked out of that.
Yes.
And so they start a new dynasty because the females were rare. And in typical polytheist royal dynasties is that it was a particular pureblood female that would start a new dynasty. So now you have a hybrid human giant dynasty that has Abrahamic bloodlines that would make a good challenge to inherit all of those blessings, birthrights, and Messianic promise if they wiped Israel from the face of the earth. And it's the Amalekites and the Malachim giants who are waiting for Israel when they come out of Egypt to wipe them from the face of the earth, to get what they would believe their rightful blessings that were taken away from Esau. Now, Esau also marries the daughter of Anna, son of Seir, so another female giant named Oholibama, and that's another giant. Now, we get another giant down the road in the time of King David, a female giant. And when David is doing many of the giant wars, even at that time, he is going to take on the Syrians, and that's going to include King Talmai, a giant patriarchal name, because you have Talmai in the time of the Exodus in Hebron, along with Ahiman and Sheshai. And you'll find that there are these names and titles that are patronymic for king titles that are passed down through the ages, and it's in many, many cultures. And so Talmai has some sort of bloodline relationship to this other giant, and he's part of the Makathim, which are giants, and lived in the land of giants and countries that Israel did not conquer, that were a little bit further along the east and north side of Mount Hermon. And so they make a peace deal as David is doing his conquering and wiping out the giants, and he accepts a female named Makkah. I'm sorry, this is the Gesherim that Talmai is king of, and the Gesherim are also giants, but the name is Makkah, which is a matriarchal bloodline name for the queen of a specific bloodline of the Makathim, which is also in that same area. And so he is taking on a bloodline giant queen as one of his wives, and Absalom is born from this marriage. And Absalom is described as the fairest and the favorite of David, but after a set of events, he is going to be banned from Israel for violating some of the laws. I won't go through all the details on it, but and he goes to live in the land of Geshur, where his mother comes from, and gets under the protection of King Talmai. Then he returns to the area of Hebron, the area of Talmai, Sheshi, Nahiman, originally called Kiriath Arba, so the patriarch of the Anakim giants, and he starts a civil war to knock David off of the throne. And so you have this hybrid human giant bloodline through Absalom that's trying to overthrow the Davidic bloodline, and would again try and usurp and replace himself and get what I would call a dragon messiah on the bloodline. So there are female giants that are listed, not many, And even in polytheism, they
mhm.
note females were rare amongst the giants, and because of that, they were forced to intermarry, otherwise they would go extinct.
I see. Right. Exactly. Where, Garrison, where do you get? As I read Bible, I didn't
Yeah.
find all those like names of like ancient like maybe giants.
Yep.
Maybe I haven't go through deep into the Bible, but where do you get those information? Is that all written in Bible or what
Yes.
kind of
Yes.
like?
All of those tribes that I just talked about are written in the Bible,
Wow,
and
I see.
that's why I did this book, because
Right.
Christians wanted me to go deep into the Bible. So as you read into that, you're going to find out all of those names and all the different giant tribes that were there. And
Wow.
and then you're going to learn about the hybrid giants, which weren't as tall. They were like 7 to 9 feet tall,
Uh-huh.
and they were called the Shazu by the Egyptians. And they lived amongst the giants in the covenant land. And that these Shazu were what I call patriarchless names listed in the table of nations. So you have 70 patriarchs, but 9 don't have a patriarch, and they're associated with the Canaanites.
Mm-hmm.
So you have Canaan, Heth, and Sidon. Sidon and Heth are the sons of Canaan. Canaan is the son of Ham, son of Noah.
Mm.
Now, you have these 9 tribes that are like the Amorites, the
Right.
Jebusites. They
Mm.
don't have a patriarch.
Mm.
And they're called families of Canaan, and that's the Hebrew word mashpaka, mashpaka, and what it means is a kind or a different species.
Mm-hmm.
There's something different. So I mentioned earlier that Rapha wasn't listed as a patriarch of the Rephaim in the table of nations. Arba, the patriarch of the Anakim, is not
Right.
listed in the table of nations.
Right.
So these names are derived from a Rephaim patriarch who married a daughter of Canaan or of Heth or of Sidon to produce these families. And in Amorite accounts and Mesopotamian accounts, the Amorites were giant-like.
Right.
Just
So
as the
I have
name
a
is too
question
forward,
here.
they're described like giants.
Mm. Like when Joshua tried to conquer the land of Canaan, right?
Yes.
He basically God like ordered the Israel people to like not like eliminate it, all things, kind of like a
Yes.
very harsh treatment.
Utterly destroy them.
Yes. So that means like all of those tribes are somehow linked with hybrid or giant.
Yes. Yeah.
They are all.
Oh, yeah. Yes, all.
Ah,
So when you look at that word utterly destroy, that's the Hebrew word haram, and it means like a religious curse or devotion, and in this case, destruction. And haram is the root word for Mount Hermon, where the original angels did
right.
the oath of Haram anathema, and the name was different than Hermon. It was changed to reflect what happened there. And
Mm-hmm.
so the Amorites and other peoples knew it as a different name. So we get names like Sion, Senir, and Sirion in the Bible. In the Ugaritic text, from the people of Ugarit, they call it Mount Saphon. So it had many different names, but it was renamed for what happened there, where the fallen angels took the oath to create the giants. And so when Israel is going to move into this land, this is the land that is promised Abraham in Genesis 15, when it lists all of these hybrid giants and giants that are in that area. The Mighty Seven and also the Mighty Ten, as I call them, because there's 3 additional they're listed as Cadmonites, they're listed as Kenizzites and Kenites. They don't have patriarchs either. They're also giants. And I go through that in book 2 as well. But that's the same land in its description as what was before the flood, where Eden was.
Mm-hmm.
And so that is God's land reserved for him on the earth, just as all the other sort of lowercase gods also have lands that they rule over on the council of the gods, right? But that was reserved for him, for them. So the giants, when they're recreated right after the flood and before the Babel dispersal of humans, where they go and move in amongst the giants all around the world, you have a scenario where through the gods that they worshipped and the Baal, the offspring gods, which weren't sent to the pit prison but were alive before the flood, they witnessed everything. They told the giants whose land was what, which was theirs and what they're going to rule over, and that which was God's land. So they knew that from the information from the gods, and they went there and waited because they knew there was going to be a response somehow, some way, for salvation for humankind, that the giants were created to enslave humankind and ensure they don't reach eternity to be raised up like angels or gods. And so they're waiting there to kill that plan as it gets started. And so Israel is going to tell them to leave before they go in, and they refuse. So there's going to be a battle, and they're always asked to leave beforehand. Now, something happens right after the flood in the biblical flood story on Mount Ararat, which is also known as Ararat means curse in Hebrew as well. And so this derives from the incident with Ham and Noah. And I go through this in book 2 as well. And that there's a sexual act that takes place there. And against Noah and or his wife, however you want to interpret that. And that Noah wakes up and he understands what has happened. And he curses Ham.
Yes.
But Ham isn't the one who receives the curse. It's Canaan. Canaan is not even born at this point.
Right.
So this is something known as a curse prophecy in the Bible. It's a curse backed by the authority of God that will be fulfilled in the future time.
Oh, wow.
So Canaan doesn't want to be subservient. Ham isn't. Cush isn't. And none of the others are. Just him, and he's like the scapegoat for this curse. So the Canaanites aren't going to move to Africa, which is the land reserved for the Hamites. The Canaanites are going to move into the land of the covenant, where the Rephaim giants are, and intermarry with them and create hybrids. And Canaan, even before that, probably even at the time of before Babel, as soon as he has the ability to produce a human female, is going to provide human females to the gods to produce the Rephaim giants after the flood. And so they're laying in wait, and they're defiling God's land and living there illegally. And Cush is the father of Nimrod. He goes to southern Africa, which is the land divvied up to him. And so you can imagine that there's land divvied up for people, the Table of Nations, all over the earth. The earth is divvied up. There's gods ruling there, and humans, descendants of Noah, will migrate there to live, which is why we have so many commonalities and things in the history and the stories, and part of the reason for that anyways. And so that Canaanites, along with the giants, laid it there in wait to try and wipe Israel from the face of the earth when they came back. And so that's what all of the wars that are happening. And Israelites weren't giants. Israelites were your average human, probably about 5 feet tall at that time. They're up against giants that were, 10 to at least 15 feet tall in the covenant land. And if you look at the Mesopotamian giants, the dark-haired giants like Gilgamesh, he was 19 feet tall and 7 feet wide. Huge, yeah. And the antediluvian giants, the giants before the flood, were bigger still. Okay, so they're a little bit smaller after the flood as well. And so Israel is coming out of Egypt as a nation of slaves. Moses is leading them, and they're doing miracles before them, and they're going to have to go up against people that are way more numerous than them, and they're all taller than them, some significantly, like the giants, which are living amongst the hybrid human giants, the Amorites and the Jebusites and the Hivites and all of those listed as the nine in the families of Canaan, and that these giants are very skilled in war. Giants were masters of war. They were fleet of foot. They were trained in war. They were ambidextrous, and they were muscular. They were fast, and so they built chariots. The Israelites didn't have chariots. They didn't have plants to build weapons, and the giants had iron for iron weapons back then. And so all of that is what they were going up against. And they had these great city-state fortresses that with walls up to the sky to protect themselves. Israel had nothing. And even when they decided they were too scared to go into the land of the covenant for obvious reasons, they're going to spend 40 years in the desert, but they're not going to have manufacturing facilities for weapons. And so only with God's help and the use of hornets and the Ark of the Covenant and whatever else the angel of the Lord that pre-exists in Jesus is going to provide for protection, they're going to discombobulate these giants, and they're going to be able to beat them, because they have no way of defeating the giants unless they're faithful to God and they get help from God. And anytime they go up against the giants or the hybrid giants and they don't have God's support, they get their butts whooped. They haven't got a chance. So in book 2, I cover all of those wars of the Exodus along with the war of giants in Genesis 14, and show people how we know these are giants. And so it feeds into the true story of what was going on there. And unfortunately, they didn't drive all of the people out, which will cause them problems down the road and cause them to violate their covenant and suffer the curses of the Holy Covenant. And history could be played out through all of the blessings of the covenant had they followed the covenant. But they did not. So we're living through the curses, but they'll be reconciled in the end time. The lost tribes of Israel and Judah will be reconciled in the last 3.5 years. God does not forget his covenant, and written right into the Holy Covenant is that even though if you don't follow the laws of the covenant and you suffer the curses, I will bring you back in the end time, and I will bring you back into the covenant.
I see, I see. In regards to the end time covenant, do you have some information in regards to the let's say like Ezekiel chapter 37? It refers like a dry bones. Becoming living existence. And then that's referring the whole family of Israel. And then basically
both the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom.
That means like the Judah and then Benjamin is in the land of mainly in Israel, but the other 10 tribes are scattered around the world, right?
They are to the 4 corners of the world.
Exactly. So they have
so to speak.
Yes. So they have to become one until the Ezekiel chapter 38, like Ezekiel war happens. Is that right understanding?
Not quite. The Ezekiel war will happen first in 38 and 39. It'll happen just before the midpoint of the last 7 years. We know it's in the last days because it says that in Ezekiel 38, or the end time. And it is before the second Exodus, which is described after the great giant Gog army is destroyed. And then you're going to have second Exodus. So Ezekiel 37 would connect into that passage about the second Exodus. And in Ezekiel 37, as you get into the teens of that chapter, it talks about the second Exodus and uniting Israel back together. So this is the time of Jacob's trouble. and it's equivalent to the Great Tribulation.
So you think it's after the Ezekiel war?
Yes, after the midpoint. Yes. And so you're going to have 144,000 go out to the whole world. And they're going to awaken lost Israel in the last 7 years. And they're going to wake up to remember who they are. And they're going to be called by name. And they're going to be in all the lands around the world. But then they're going to be persecuted. They're going to be jailed.
Yes.
And so after the Antichrist runs to power, after the abomination in the temple, the people of the southern kingdom who have occupied Israel today and are there for that Ezekiel 38 war, they're going to recognize that Antichrist is the false Messiah, where before they're going to think he's the true Messiah. And they're going to escape into the wilderness to be protected by God for 3.5 years.
Mm-hmm.
At that time, in the time of Jacob's trouble, is the time of second Exodus. So that passage is Isaiah 37 and verse 7 for the time of Jacob's trouble, and Israel is going to be saved out of that, and they're going to be led in Exodus, and so this is part of the reconciliation. So now we want to link in Daniel 12:1. Where you have this resurrection, some to the second death, and some for to be resurrected into eternity. And this is spoken to Daniel's people, not the Christian church. This is to Israel and to Judah. And this is the time of trouble, the same Hebrew word sarah as in Jacob's trouble, which is the same equivalent for tribulation as in the Great Tribulation of the last 3.5 years. That's talked about in Matthew 24:21 and Mark 13:19. Mark 13:19 says affliction, but it's the same Greek word thalipsis. It should be translated the same, talking about the same event. And so this is the Great Tribulation that Jacob is going to be saved from, Israel is going to be saved from. And so at that time, when Michael has arisen, this is also the time of the war in heaven between the gods that's going to happen again. And that the passage in Ezekiel 37 is talking about that resurrection as Israel is taken in exodus to the wilderness to meet up with the people who fled from Jerusalem and the surrounding area to the wilderness. They're going to be judged there. And there's also the resurrection of Israel at that time. That's the dry bones that are coming up.